Your right to swing your fists ends where my nose begins. We've all heard sayings about the balance between freedom and responsibility, but how does that apply to the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms? Welcome back to Relate Nation. Today we're delving into American history to explore one of the most hotly debated constitutional rights. Before we navigate through debates and interpretations, let's start with the Second Amendment's actual text. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. The term militia can be puzzling in today's context. In the late 18th century, a militia was not a standing army, and by that we mean a permanent professional military force, maintained by a government. Instead, a militia was more like a neighborhood watch, composed of regular folks who could be called upon in emergencies to protect their communities. Why does this matter? Well, the Founding Fathers were concerned about tyranny, the abuse of power by those in authority. They had lived through British rule and knew the risks of unchecked power. They saw the militia as a kind of safety net, a way for ordinary citizens to balance the power of the government. So, owning a gun wasn't just about hunting or self-defense. It was also about keeping the government honest, serving as a final check against abuses that could strip away individual freedoms and states' rights. When the framers of the Constitution penned the Second Amendment, their primary goals were multifaceted. First, they believed in the natural right of self-defense, but it went beyond personal safety. They were concerned about the collective well-being of their newly formed nation. Remember, these were men who had just liberated their country from what they viewed as an oppressive British rule. They understood the value of an armed populace, not just in warding off external invaders, but also in deterring internal abuses of power. To the framers, the right to bear arms was deeply entwined with the ideals of liberty and self-governance. Another layer was their distrust of standing armies, which we clarified earlier as permanent professional military forces. The Founding Fathers feared that such armies could be tools of oppression if commanded by a tyrannical government. Instead, they saw a well-regulated militia, a body of ordinary citizens, as a more democratic alternative, serving as a check and balance against potential government overreach. The interpretation of the Second Amendment has been clarified through several key court decisions that have upheld the individual's right to bear arms. District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008 says that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm for self-defense within the home. It was a pivotal decision that clarified that gun ownership is not solely tied to the militia service. McDonald versus City of Chicago in 2010. This case extends the Heller decision to the states, confirming that the Second Amendment applies not just to federal enclaves, but also to individual states under the 14th Amendment. Caetano versus Massachusetts in 2016. This case overturned a state law banning stun guns, affirming that the Second Amendment extends to all forms of bearable arms, not just those in existence during the founding era. Wren versus District of Columbia in 2017. This case struck down D.C.'s good reason requirement for concealed carry permits, reinforcing that law-abiding citizens have a right to carry firearms in public for self-defense. If you're watching from my home state of Oregon, you might wonder how the Second Amendment applies here. Well, we fall under the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and one noteworthy case from the circuit is Young versus Hawaii. In this case, George Young initially won a victory for the right to openly carry a firearm in public for self-defense. However, this decision was overturned when the full court reviewed the case. The journey of Young v. Hawaii through the courts highlights the ongoing debate surrounding our Second Amendment rights, even in states that fall under the Ninth Circuit like Oregon. Throughout this video, we've talked about the multifaceted nature of the Second Amendment, from its historical underpinnings rooted in early militia, to its legal interpretations through landmark court cases. This amendment is a foundational aspect of American society. In the cultural landscape, the Second Amendment remains a hotbed for political discourse. But let's move beyond that rhetoric for a moment and ground ourselves in a real-world scenario. Imagine it's the dead of night. Your family is asleep, and suddenly, the sanctity of your home is violated by an armed intruder. At this juncture, your stance on the Second Amendment ceases to be theoretical. Now it's life or death. If you've championed laws that disarm you, the law-abiding citizen, what recourse do you have? Waiting for law enforcement might not be an option, especially given potential delays in response times. This isn't a far-fetched scenario, it's a stark reality faced by many. So when advocating for stricter gun laws, consider the full scope of what that entails. It's not just about removing firearms from the equation. That won't happen. It's about tipping the balance of power away from the law-abiding citizens and toward those who operate outside the law. In a world of uncertainties, the Second Amendment isn't just ink on paper. It's the line between empowerment and vulnerability. Forget the political noise. When it's you versus danger, the law should be on your side, not against you. The Second Amendment ensures that. Debate it, discuss it, but don't disarm it. End of story.